we're sort of androgynous, right? And we like to think about winemaking as a spectrum, right? And you know, if you're in Napa Valley, you're exploring this much of the spectrum, traditional Bordeaux winemaking, but there's so much more to that, right? All the way out to like, you know, 0.0 natural wines, right? And we like to explore all of it. It's pretty unconventional for a winery, particularly in Napa Valley, to, you know, be kind of more inspired by punk rock and rock and roll than maybe Robert Parker.
Hello everybody, I am here with Ed Feuchuk. He is the general manager of Tank Garage Winery. We're here at the tasting room in Paso Robles, California, and we're going to taste through some of the wines. But first, tell me a little bit about where we are and the history of the Tank Garage Winery.
Sure. So we are sitting in our brand new Paso Robles filling station here in downtown Paso Robles. It's our second location. We are most notably in the back room, which is kind of top secret for now, but hopefully if you're watching this, you'll have the chance to come experience it. Tank Garage Winery is a 10-year-old brand. We opened in May of 2014 in a restored 1930s gas station in the town of Calistoga, which is in the northern part of Napa Valley.
I've seen that a few times when I've been driving in and out of Calistoga.
Yeah, it's been there literally forever. And a lot of people have had it, and it had been a number of things through the years. So originally it was a streamlined Modern Art Deco filling and service station back in the kind of 40s, 50s. But it had been many things throughout the years. We like to think the kind of heyday of the garage prior to us was when it was owned by a guy named Eddie Bratton, who was this famous Bay Area Indian motorcycle mechanic and racer. And he had it, his family had it for about 20 years. Eventually he passed on, the family, you know, passed the garage on, and, you know, when we got a hold of it around 2012, it was like, one part was like a dog groomer place and the other part was like a wine shop. But we saw kind of what it used to be, and we wanted to restore sort of the, you know, original feel of it. So we redid the exterior, brought back the streamlined modern facade, put a cool lubrication bar inside that harkened back to kind of the mechanics aesthetic of the 50s and 60s. We put a speakeasy in the back of that, and then we had to figure out what we were going to do with it, right? So we're like, you know, we were in the wine business. James, the owner, had a winery in Napa Valley, a more traditional winery called James Cole Winery. And really from the onset, this whole project was about exploring and experimenting, right? So on one hand, we're going to explore a variety of wine styles, wine regions, wine varieties, winemaking techniques, and then the brand itself is really going to be a celebration and an exploration of California and California culture. So most notably kind of like retro, you know, Prohibition-era through the 80s in terms of cultural impact, but also from a winemaking impact. And so
that's why we have a tasting room here, and that's why some of the design choices are where they are, but also how we can be in like a back room speakeasy.
Yeah.
Like we're experiencing.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's pretty unconventional for a winery, particularly in Napa Valley, to, you know, be kind of more inspired by punk rock and rock and roll than maybe Robert Parker. But that was just kind of the stuff we were into, and so we found a scaffold to explore different winemaking interests and, you know, artistic interests and storytelling interests through this thing that's ultimately become, you know, a pretty big movement, Tank Garage Winery.
Awesome. Well, let's start trying some of the wines and talk a little bit about the style in which these wines are made.
Sure. Well, before we get started, I'm going to give you a little bit of a foundation on who we are and what we do. And it's kind of, I don't know, three things really. So the first thing is we're direct to consumer only. So our wines are not in restaurants, they're not in stores, they're not exported, they're not sent to be scored. We make just a little bit of the stuff we like, which is the second part. It's all limited production, so the most we do, which is this wine we're about to have, is maybe 700 cases. We make lots as small as 6 cases and sell them out pretty quickly.
I can see selling 6 cases would be pretty easy.
Probably the next thing I should talk about is every single wine we make is a one and done. So we may make a particular wine with a particular name from a particular vintage one year, but if you come back to our tasting room or you check our website the next year, it may not be there. So we might have something with some similar lineage or some inspirations, but every single thing is just a one-off, one and done. So our labels are unique, there's built-in freshness, there's a reason to come back here, and if you like something, you better get it. And I guess the last thing is most of our wines are blends, and we specialize in blends from all over California. So we get fruit from as high up as Mendocino all the way down to Santa Barbara. We get a lot of stuff from San Luis Obispo County and Paso Robles. But this next one we're about to try is our sort of signature rosé for 2024, and it comes from the Sierra foothills, and it's called Adult Toys. All right, so this is primarily a Grenache with some Mourvedre, and then just like a hint, maybe like 1 or 2%, 1% of Counois. And we make it in sort of a Provençal style, which is, we like the wines, the rosés from France that have just like, you know, slight notes of flavor and aromas, and has crisp acidity, and it's refreshing because in Calistoga and now in Paso Robles, it gets hot as shit during the summer. So this isn't a rosé that's supposed to be like round and enveloping. It's meant to be crisp and refreshing. And that's why we go to the Sierra foothills to get this fruit, because the way the fruit ripens there, it lends itself to, you know, good notes of minerality, good complexity. We pick this generally pretty early. Sometimes we pick this in like the middle of August or late August. And then we make it deliberately, so we're not bleeding off any juice. We're going in there to make this specific style of rosé, and we make it every single year. And so
from the beginning, this is something that is, these grapes are destined to go into your rosé.
Yeah, from the get-go. Like, we have these specific grape contracts with some growers up there that we've been working with for a long time, because we know every single year we're going to pick these grapes deliberately to be made into rosé that's in this style. Like I said earlier, the blends aren't always the same from year to year. So sometimes it might be Mourvedre dominant, sometimes it might be Grenache dominant, sometimes there might be Cinsault in there. But ultimately, we're always trying to drive towards this kind of light, crisp style, which is sort of these really pretty pinkish salmon hues to them.
And the branding on this one specifically, Adult Toys, that is different every year. So like, you're making a rosé from these growers every year, but it's going to have a different name.
Yeah. So if you're watching this on YouTube in 2025, 26, 27, and you're looking for a rosé, you want to go buy this rosé, it's not going to be on our website. We'll have something similar, but Adult Toys was a one-time production. And one of the things we're really well known for is our labels. So our labels, they're not like your typical wine label that just have like a mock-up, maybe there's some text and a gold logo on it. We really like to treat them like album covers. So if you think about your favorite music artist, and you used to like going through records at the record store, they always had really cool album artwork that gave you sort of an expression of what was inside, or maybe told a story. So in this case, we're big fans of sort of punk rock, and we wanted to do something that sort of, I don't know, reincarnated the vibe of like the CBGB's, you know, late 70s, early 80s punk scene in New York. It's kind of, you know, New York Dolls vibe to it. We thought of a band, just Adult Toys sounded like a cool name. So we mocked up this cool flyer that you might find in like a punk rock bathroom back in the day. And I don't know, it's kind of a fun play on words, but yeah.
Are you working with local artists to make these? Or you have somebody in-house who makes them?
No, you know what? The fun thing about being a garage winery is this remains 10 years later, 2 locations later of garage projects. So James, the owner, and I made this label. We came up with this idea, and pretty much everything you see on our labels, we made in-house. And I think that's important because, you know, this is going to be a bad analogy, so don't take this the wrong way, but like, a Prince song is a Prince song because it's written by Prince, and it's played by Prince, and it's sung by Prince, right? And so in a lot of ways, our labels are like that too. It comes from us. We're not outsourcing it. Every once in a while, we'll work with some artist friends that we have to do something specific or take an image they've come up with, but we'd like to keep everything we have in-house because that's a way for us to differentiate ourselves from a storytelling standpoint.
Do you start, I know that, for example, for this, you're starting from wanting to make the wine, and then you're coming up with a name and a label package from that, or how is that process? Is it starting like, hey, I've got this name, and then what kind of wine can I make that'll be? It's
both. So sometimes we come up with a concept and we say, hey, Bertus, who's our amazingly talented winemaker, make something to fit this. So Example of that is we make a lot of skin fermented, skin contact white wines, sometimes called orange wines, right? But you know, the skin is always in there, and you basically take white grapes and you will press them and leave them on the skins you might a red wine, extract color and aroma and fragrance. And so we had a concept of, you know, skin contact, skin fermented, skin flick. So we made this cool label that had an old 1970s porno reel on it, like an actual porno movie. And we're like, Bertus, we need an orange skin, you know, contact white wine to go in this. Sometimes it's like that. Sometimes it's the opposite. So last year we got some awesome Gamay from Barsati Vineyard, and it was just so juicy, like just as juicy as possible. And we're like, well, let's just call it juicy because we had all of our internal notes. This is the juicy Gamay. And so we kind of mocked up this thing that sort of harkens back to Notorious B.I.G.'s Juicy song. That was kind of like this spray paint graffiti New York thing, and we call it juicy. So it works both ways.
Okay,
Yeah.
awesome.
This wine, just really quickly, again, it's supposed to be light and fresh and crisp. Lots of beautiful, you know, wild strawberry notes, fresh cut cherries, a little bit of watermelon, nice crisp acidity, maybe a little bit of stone fruit in there. Just the best wine you could possibly have in the summertime.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it has a lot of, I felt a lot of sort of the warm vintage Southern French, some of the stuff you find like in the Roussillon or in the Côte de Provence area.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that you accomplished your objective on that one.
That was our inspiration.
All right,
Yeah.
what else we got?
All right, let's see. Next up on the docket, you know, we're sort of, if it's not already clear by now, we're sort of defined by our inconsistencies both in artwork and maybe winemaking styles, or maybe like the types of wines we make. And so this next wine we're going to enjoy together is something that we kind of struck gold on maybe 5 years ago, and have kind of made a different version ever since. And it's a Petnat sparkling wine.
Wonderful. Yeah.
And it's a Petnat Rosé of Barbera that we get from the Sierra foothills. And so we have at times gotten Barbera for still red wines, even sometimes we'll put it in our Rosé. But one year, Bertus, our winemaker, said, hey, we've been making Petnats, which we'll talk about in a second, for a little while. I got an idea, what if we use Barbera for that? And the beautiful thing about Barbera, especially the stuff we get from the Sierra foothills, is this balance between flavor and acidity, right? And when you marry flavor and acidity, you get those really concentrated, intensified, mouth-watering flavors. It's like when you have, you know, citric acid on Skittles or candy, a sour candy, it makes your mouth water. Mm-hmm. And we get the same thing here. So we went all in on making a Barbera Petnat called Popnat probably 5 years ago at this point. And basically every year since then we made a different version of it. And this particular one is from 2023. It's called Skateland. And it's a blend. It has some, it's mostly Barbera, so I think here it's 67% Barbera, 11% Chardonnay, 6% Grenache, 6% Mourvedre, 5% Cinsault, and 5% Falangina. So there's a lot in there, but ultimately...
It's got that hard candy, it's got that little bit of funk on it.
Yeah. So this is one of the most popular wines we make every single year, and again, it's a different label and it's a slightly different blend, and maybe it looks slightly different in color, but I think it really does kind of bring to the surface those like candy flavors. I always think of like those like wild strawberry sour strips you get at the candy place at the mall, or kids used to get at the candy place in the mall.
Has a little bit of that sourness that you not quite at the level where you're going to like recoil from it,
Yeah, you're not
but just
trying
right
too
up to
much.
that edge.
Yeah, yeah.
So knowing that you're making a Petnat, a lot of times that is connected to brands that are really focused in on either making wine very naturally or being all in part of like the natural wine scene.
Sure.
To what extent does that apply to you guys?
Oh, I'd say this is a question that gets asked a lot about us, and in a lot of ways we're sort of androgynous, right? And we like to think about winemaking as a spectrum, right? And you know, if you're in Napa Valley, you're exploring this much of the spectrum, traditional Bordeaux winemaking, but there's so much more to that, right? All the way out to like, you know, 0.0 natural wines, right? And we like to explore all of it. So our curiosity with Petnat started almost 10 years ago, and I think it was just a curiosity about the technique. And so if you're not familiar with the process, as opposed to the kind of champagne method where you'll make a beautiful still wine, you'll start a second fermentation usually with sugar, and you have a lot of control over it. The beauty of the Petnat, or the kind of the Methode Ancestral, the original method of making sparkling wines, is sort of its unpredictability. So what we do here, and other producers of Petnat do here, is they'll pick the fruit, they'll crush it up, and while the juice is still fermenting, they'll bottle it. So the bubbles in there are created by the one and only fermentation. There's not a second fermentation started. With that, there's a lot of you have to disgorge the bottle, so you have to open them at some point, let the sediment out. You have to check them a lot. There's lots of volatility. We've had ones that were, I wouldn't say explosive, but might foam over if you didn't take care of them well. But really, our fascination with Petnat just kind of came down to seeing if we could sort of wrangle this process and do something cool and unique with it. And there's something sort of poetic with sort of hey, we have less control than the champagne method would allow us, but that's kind of the cool thing. So let's see what we get for it.
It's like those bands that sort of had their first hit album before they learned to play their instruments.
Yeah.
Like that sort of thing, where you're playing around with this idea of playing a little bit on the edge, or letting something be a little wilder. Is Petnat a wine that you're making every year? You're making a point to make a Petnat?
We make a Petnat. So we make a version of this one, a sparkling Barbera, every single year. In the last couple of years, we've also made sort of a white variation of it. So we have one out now that's 100% Wendy Clone Chardonnay called Hippie Sippy, which by the time anyone sees this will probably be sold out. And then we have another one coming out in a couple of weeks called Hella Fizz, which again is a Petnat. It's a beautiful wine, lots of really bright lemon and citrus notes to it, pear, green apple. I hope you guys have the chance to taste it. But the one thing I'd say to kind of put a bow on this discussion about Petnat is, one, we're not dogmatically natural or anything. I think we kind of take an analog wine approach, which is we want to seek out to make a wine a certain way, and sometimes that's with a lot of control, sometimes that's with no control, sometimes it's in between. And with the Petnats, it's a higher risk thing. Than you can tell why they made a successive method for making sparkling wine, because this one comes with a lot of challenges. We've had issues with having to disgorge things multiple times, the bottles exploding. But if you nail it, and I think we've got to a point where we are absolutely nailing it, it gets something that is really pretty and tells a really cool story. All right, we're moving on to red wines. So we make, again, a vast variety of wines, but we make some absolutely killer red wines. And this first one is called Tuta Pasa, and it's sort of a Cal-Ital blend. And we get a lot of this fruit from Soleto Vineyard in San Benito County, so a little bit north of here. And I can't even explain how proud I am of our winemaking team, because they absolutely crush anything with Italian varieties in it. So we previously had a sparkling Barbera, and Barbera is my personal favorite grape, tied up with Sangiovese, but something that I think our whole winemaking team really loves, because again, it's that combination of flavor with acidity that makes these kind of mouth-watering, experience in your mouth. But this one,
I'm talking about the experience in my nose. This is smelling amazing.
Yeah, this one's cool.
This is almost like the best barrel sample you ever tasted, super fresh, super light, super bright.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a good that we use the term brightness a lot, and you can even see it. I don't know if you can in the color, but just really beautiful kind of bright cherry colors. The aromas are very similar, but this one is a blend of 76% Barbera, 9% Valdeggi, it's the one sort of a non-Italian thing, 6% Fresia, 5% Montepulciano, and then 2% Falanghina and 2% Ruque. So these are some,
I feel like Fresia is going crazy right now.
Fresia's popping off.
Yeah.
It's becoming a thing, but oftentimes we have Falanghina in here. We'll blend in small amounts of white wine in there. A lot of times the acidity helps it make a better version of itself. But this particular one is sort of inspired by old Italian field blends. And again, we really like Italian red wines because we think they're very versatile. So you can drink them by themselves. You don't need to have a big heavy steak, but they're also awesome to go with food. This one you mentioned is bright. There's fresh flavors. It's juicy. One of the cool things we can do with this, if you want, is you can slightly chill it. So again, we're in Calistoga, we're Paso Robles, it gets really hot. This idea of a chillable red wine, so an alternative to rosé or sparkling wine or white wine that you can drink during the summer, is really appealing to us. So this is just one of probably our most versatile wine. I think probably for everyone on our team right now, this is one of the favorites.
Yeah, no, I loved that. That was one of my favorite things from you guys that I've ever had. That's really delicious, really, really pretty.
Yeah. So by the time you see this video, this
will all be gone and you can't have any.
Right? But the beauty is, if you go on our website or you walk into one of our locations, you can say, do you have any, Calital or anything with Sangiovese or Barbera in it? And we'll likely have something that's very similar in a similar style.
If somebody reaches out to you and they reference this specific wine, you're going to know what they're talking about. And be like, hey, okay, well, we don't have this, but we have something.
Yeah. So another thing we do, because we recognize that making a wine only once has a lot of benefits, right? Things are always fresh and exciting. If you like it, you got to get it then. But there's also, there's challenges introduced with that, which is, people come in here and maybe they want consistency, maybe they want to get more of the stuff they like, right? So we have a lot of consistency built into the lineage and the way we produce wines. But if you're ever looking for a reference, you can check our social media account. We normally post on Instagram, like, if you like this wine, you probably like this wine. If you go to our website and you want to reference any previous wine and maybe something that's similar now, we list those with all the new wines. So we have a good way of helping you guide something you might be, if you loved something 2 years ago, we can find you something pretty easily that you like.
Because that's one of the big challenges that people have with wine in general, is that they're laying out their money in most instances before they've had a chance to taste the wine. And so they have to do a lot on the reputation of the place, which is less the case in New World wines than Old World wines, that the place is a determiner of style.
Yes.
And they have to base it on sort of the brand. But in a lot of instances, the winery's brand is not so communicative. And so, like, what are you guys, like, in the very shortest way possible, how would how would you say, like, what is a Tank Garage Winery wine from a consumer's perspective that may be thinking of ordering something through mail order, and they're in some part of the country that they're not able to get to your tasting room? So somebody who's coming to these wines without getting a chance to taste them first, and there's no repetition, and a lot of these are blends, and a lot of these are parts of California that frankly most people haven't heard of, Sierra foothills and places like Paso Robles even for a lot of people. What is sort of the simplest way to describe the style that they can expect?
Oh man, all right, there's a great David Bowie quote, and we love David Bowie because he always reinvented himself like we do, but he said, I don't know what we're going to do next, but I promise it won't be boring. And I think that's what we can promise you, which is there will always be a variety, there will always be an evolution, there will always be changes, but we promise that, one, it will be delicious, so it will never be so esoteric that you have to pretend to like it, and it will never be sort of boring and basic. Two, the packaging, the story, the whole sort of cumulative package will tell an interesting story and have a compelling reason to exist beyond just being a wine. So if I had to summarize it, is we will always deliver on keeping things fresh and exciting and delicious for you.
All right.
Yep. All right.
I think you had one more red for me?
One more red for you.
All right.
All right, so lastly, we are going to, what should we have with this? Pour this out. The last thing we're going to do is we're going to pour sort of our take on like a Bordeaux style blend. And I think starting in Napa Valley, we get a lot of questions, especially down here. Are you a Napa Valley winery? Are you just going to produce Napa Valley wines? The real answer is we predominantly produce wines from outside of Napa and Sonoma. Like our 85% of productions from outside those wine regions. And this particular one is actually mostly from Sonoma County. And it's called BDXSM, so sort of a riff on BDX, but it's a blend of 82% Cabernet Sauvignon and 18% Malbec, right? So I think this is kind of evidential in what I talked about earlier, which is we don't just make the weird, orange wines and the pét-nats and the 00 Daddy wines. We also make more traditional wines. Some people might call them more serious wines. We think they're all pretty serious, but and I don't know how you can take this seriously because it's kind of like a bondage label. But this is our interpretation of what we like out of Bordeaux fruit. So trying to capture a good balance of structure and power with grace and complexity. And so one of the things a lot of people don't know about our winemaking team, Bertus, our winemaker, classically trained, right? He makes wines for James Cole Winery. Those are all super high-end, Cabernet Sauvignons, Bordeaux blends. They know how to do everything right. So when we make Bordeaux blends, we work with amazing vineyards. We spare no cost in terms of like sorting and crushing. We do a lot of open top fermentations, extended macerations. So sometimes we'll ferment things and leave them on the skins for 60 days in big, brand new French punch-in barrels. we're just really trying to make a beautiful expression of Bordeaux wines, which, you walk into Tank Garage Winery and you see this label, which is kind of edgy. It's done by our friend Renee Garza, and maybe you don't take it seriously, but once you actually taste the wine, you'll realize that this is a serious wine in a really sexy bottle. So that's what we're going for here.
Very cool.
What are you getting?
So yeah, like I said, this is very. I've tasted so many wines from California, especially so many different Cabernet interpretations, that the two things that sort of jumped out at me when I was tasting and listening to you is one, that this does communicate a very strong Sonoma identity.
Yeah.
That mixture of the warmth with a little more acid and a little more fruits that go, for me, a little blue, which is really nice. And then the Malbec in there. I think people are sleeping on a lot of Malbec from that part.
We're good at a lot of things. We're great at Calistoga blends. We crush it with Malbec. Our team has a ton of experience working with Malbec, making single varietal Malbecs. We're pros at Malbec. So yeah, I think the last thing, maybe just to summarize everything we do here, if anyone has any questions about this, because we get it a lot when people come into our filling station, Paso Robles or Calistoga, is like, are you guys serious? Who makes your wines? Do you make wine? We work with probably 45 different varieties of grapes every single year. We source them from about 20 to 30 different vineyards. We partner directly with these vineyards. We pick the grapes. We bring them back to our facility in Northern California, and we bring them all the way through to bottling. So we're a full-on winemaking operation here, with very specific intent, very specific opinions, very kind of specific goals when we're making these wines. And so if you're looking for a winery that makes wines in a credible way, but is also doing something different and new and adding to the conversation, you'll probably like Tank Garage Winery.
Very nice. Talk to me a little bit about your decision to open up a tasting room in Paso. So I understand having a tasting room in Napa, even if your grapes are not from Napa. I think that's the tourism epicenter, that's the reputational epicenter of American winemaking. It makes a lot of sense to be in Napa. What brought you to Paso and not Santa Barbara and not Mendocino and not somewhere else?
Yeah, I think the first thing is, again, we're a California brand, right? We're not Napa Valley, we're not Sonoma. We love everything about California, from the winemaking standpoint, from the vineyard historical standpoint, to the cultural standpoint, right? And we have long loved and made wines from Paso Robles and San Luis Obispo. We have a lot of friends in the area. We're friends with the guys at Levo. We're friends with Eric Jackson from Aaron Wines. And slowly but surely, the more time we spent down here, the more we fell in love with the winemaking community that's here, the vineyards that they're growing here, and really we're super stoked about the momentum they've had as a winemaking region, right? Which is, no longer are they a second fiddle to Napa and Sonoma. They really got their own cool thing going here, and we love that. We also saw a lot of similarities with Calistoga, where we're from, sort of this small town feel, this outpost feel, and this one just felt like the most natural fit, which is, we know people in the community, we know the grapes, we know the people. It has lots of similarities with what we're doing. They kind of have a counterculture rebel vibe going here. It just felt like the right place. And so when we sort of realized that, hey, we can only do so much out of a small gas station, Calistoga, they're constantly booked up. We have, we don't have vineyards we can build extra, seating areas in. The natural progression was, where else could we do this? And we're a California brand, so we went to California's, one of California's most notable wine growing regions and winemaking regions, Paso Robles. And so we're just getting started here, but I just know this is the right fit for us. They've embraced us. We're already seeing the cool stuff that's coming around down the pike. We're just excited to be a part of it. Hopefully we can contribute in a positive way.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you for tasting with me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, guys.